We will mention what brokerages have been saying, but I just want to go across to Saswata Guha, who's been with us on the phone line from Fitch to understand how he sees this. Good morning, Saswata. Thanks so much for taking our call. How do you see it? I mean, I know I've seen some analyst reports this morning saying that, look, they front-loaded it, so that's a good thing. And yes, it is a good thing, but, it is a bad thing that all of this existed. And actually, there is still some stress remain in the bank's books.
Hi, good morning. Well, I mean, I'm not sure how much they front-loaded it. Of course, if you sort of distill the quarter performance, I would not go, I would not repeat what Ira has already sort of laid out. But I think at a very high level, if you see, I mean, clearly this quarter has been driven by two basic factors. One, of course, is the catch-up provisioning, which is essentially loans where RBI had serious differences with the bank and which were forced to be classified as NPLs, and that was the backlog. And two, the second one is most recent RBI circular, which saw a fairly large restructured loans slip into NPLs, and obviously that invited provisions of its own. Clearly, I think we obviously have had certain assumptions or are going with certain assumptions on the NPLs, and we believe that this is not yet the end of it. More there. Although, the quarterly loss clearly was a surprise to us in the sense that while we did expect the full year earnings to come, to decline quite substantially, which it did, what we did not expect was a quarterly loss. In my view, the reason why there has been one is because, some of these provisions, which arguably could have been smoothened over the quarters had some of these assets been recognized around the time when those divergences came out, then the impact would not have been so severe as we had seen in this recent most quarter. So I think on balance, it's not necessarily a performance which is, out of our expectations, but clearly the loss and such a large one at that has certainly surprised us to a certain extent.
Saswata, just a couple of points of note for the broader industry as well. They didn't give a number, but they said a material amount of the slippages are on account of the RBI's new circular. So then one should expect a similar, not similar quantum, but certainly a similar trend across the larger corporate banks?
Oh yes, and which is the point I was trying to sort of emphasize that, what we've seen in case of Axis is it will not be isolated simply to Axis. We expect many banks, in fact, to report losses, certainly for the quarter, and who knows, perhaps for the full year as well, on account of both catch-up provisions as well as these new norms from the RBI, which basically means that whatever was there existing with banks under the restructured book, a large part of that, we are going with the assumption of at least 50 to 60% of that book will now slip into NPLs and invite provisions in excess of 40%.
And Saswata, the other thing that was notable to me in the press conference, they mentioned that from their power sector exposure, I think the incidence of bad loans or NPAs is almost 40%. I mean, I know the 40% number is also true of, the contribution to slippages this quarter coming from power sector. But overall power sector loans, 40% of them have turned bad, which, gets us to that one residual part of the bad loan recognition process which was pending, which is power. Again, that's going to hurt across the industry.
Yes, that is true. And, as we've always said, I mean, power was always that elephant in the room. And it is pertinent not just from the perspective of potential NPLs, but mind you, I mean, these assets will now go into resolution. And yes, we have been hearing a lot around the first 12 accounts, but let's not forget, large part of those accounts are still, we still don't know how resolution will play out in the power sector, which we think will be a lot more difficult. And quite frankly, while I do not while I do think that resolution will happen, but it will come at the cost of significant haircuts. And you're right that power will continue to be a pain point for the sector as a whole.
Saswata, thank you so much. Appreciate your early morning call to give us a sense of what's happening.